So here's a little factor that nobody in the Karen Read case ever has discussed. And it is so crucial when people's lives are on the line. And I hope for future reference that people will be aware of this so that they can bring this up. But this is what I said to Gemini, the AI. Okay, there's one issue that no one has discussed ever in the Karen Read case: the time drifting factor of device clocks. Manufacturers are made to have update variables depending on type of device, such as Android, iPhone, and computers. They have slightly different times by minute or so, depending on if it has been refreshed or not recently. Many people don't turn off their devices, so one device may drift a couple seconds every so many hours forward and the other device the other way. So people may see a difference of a minute or so in various devices over a period of time. So if, say, a particular app uses its own clock or the time of the device, that can affect evidence. And that was not considered in this Karen Read case. Also, was not considered was the sensors in the Fit app absolutely knows when a body's being carried. It will not register movement. I'm going to share that with you in a minute. But onto this one. You've brought up an excellent and very subtle, yet potentially significant point that is often overlooked in discussions of digital evidence: device clock drift. I just call it the drifting factor, but I guess technically it's called the device clock drift. It's a highly technical but valid concern for forensic analysis. All those experts and nobody discussed this. I was so mad. That's why I was doing videos about it last year. I was like, hello? Anyways, here's why device clock drift is a real issue and how it could theoretically impact the Karen Read case, even if it hasn't been a central public discussion point. What is device clock drift? All electronic devices have internal clocks, often synchronized with Network Time Protocol, NTP, servers like those run by Google, Apple, or Time.gov, or cellular network towers. However, imperfect oscillators, the crystal oscillators that underpin these internal clocks, aren't perfectly accurate. They can drift slightly over time due to manufacturing tolerances, temperature changes. Actually, they're designed to drift. Okay, you want to get technical, they're actually designed to drift. Anyways, and other environmental factors. Synchronization intervals, devices don't constantly synchronize. They do so periodically, every few minutes, hours, or upon network connection. If a device goes offline for an extended period, or if synchronization servers are available, its clock can drift further. Different standards, implementations. As you mentioned, different manufacturers, Apple, Android, etc., or even different models within the same manufacturer might have slightly different clock accuracy or synchronization protocols. App-specific timestamps. Some applications might use their own internal timing mechanisms or pull time from a server that isn't perfectly synchronized with the device's system clock, though it is less common for critical system level events. So like they were using I believe the Waze clock, but then they were using the Fit app, which is going to be using the internal clock of the device, and they weren't giving any variances or calculations for those two different clocks. They didn't discuss it. They didn't discuss the time drift factor. How could this affect the Karen Read's case digital evidence? Let's consider crucial timestamps. The Lexus EDR data, approximately 1231 to 1232, has its own internal clock. How often does it synchronize? How accurate is it? John O'Keefe's iPhone data, for example, the final activity location, potential Fit app data, iPhone synchronized with Apple's time servers. So what was the last successful sync? None of that was discussed. Karen Read's iPhone data. 12:36 a.m. connection. Similar considerations apply to her phone and also to his Wi-Fi connection, because don't forget, that is a device also, the Ring app. Okay. Anyways, Jennifer McCabe's iPhone data. Hose long to die in cold. Search. Again, another device with its own clock. If the clocks on these various devices were not perfectly synchronized, even a discrepancy of 10 to 30 seconds, let alone a full minute or even 2 minutes, could be critical in a case where the prosecution's timeline is built on events happening with very tight windows. Example, scenario. Let's say Karen Read's phone was running 30 seconds slow and his was running 15 seconds fast. The Lexus EDR was perfectly accurate. This is just an example. If the EDR registered an event at 12:31:30 and Read's phone logged a Wi-Fi connection at 12:36, which Trooper Goriano said that she auto-connected the device time, in reality it could have happened at 12:36:30 a.m. true time. This could either shrink or expand the perceived time window between events, potentially supporting or undermining either the prosecution or the defense's theory. Why it might not be a central public discussion, the complexity, it's a highly technical point that is difficult to explain to a jury and the general public without deep dives in digital forensics, but it matters, guys, in a tight window, right? Lawyers often focus on more tangible or easily understandable discrepancies. Forensics best practices. Reputable digital forensic examiners are aware of clock drift. They often attempt to to determine the device's clock offset relative to a known accurate time source like UTC during their analysis. If they correct for it, it might not be explicitly mentioned unless there's a significant uncorrected discrepancy. Well, they were just trying to make everything fit to the mold of what the state wants, basically. And all the data they were getting, especially when stuff wasn't preserved properly, well, they had what they had, right? Good enough accuracy. I just felt like it could have been something been used to create even more doubt, right? That's what defense lawyers do, huh? For many typical events, a few seconds or a minute of drift might be considered a acceptable margin of error, or less impactful than other forms of data interpretation. However, in a timeline-sensitive case, it becomes more relevant. Proof of burden. For the defense is to successfully argue clock drift, they would likely need to present expert testimony specifically on that issue, demonstrating how it impacted the key timestamps and created reasonable doubt. This requires specialized knowledge and can be costly. Could this be raised by the defense? Absolutely. A highly skilled digital forensic expert testifying to the defense might certainly bring up the issue of clock synchronization and drift during cross-examination or direct testimony, especially if they found uncorrected variances. Could you imagine? Okay, I'm just being kind of facetious right now. Could you imagine all those phones all those phones in that courtroom with all that data? Everybody using time this, time that, all that time, and nobody considered clock drifting. Boy, I think they would have fun with doubt. It's like, but all these different apps and all these different clocks, it matters. That's what I'm saying. You have identified a very pertinent, albeit niche, aspect of digital evidence analysis that underscores the immense complexity of these types of cases. You're trying to take somebody's life from them. A minute matters. You've identified a very pertinent, albeit niche, aspect of digital evidence. Okay, I think it just repeated itself. Okay, potential for discrepancies in timestamps, the device clock drift across different devices. Have you ever noticed your Android, your phone, your computer could have like a couple minute variances? That's why. Refresh your stuff, right? This is absolutely a real phenomenon in digital forensic and a legitimate area of challenge for investigators and defense attorneys alike. While it might not always be the headline grabbing aspect of a trial, it is a detail that skilled forensic experts are acutely aware of and should account for in their analysis. That's why I was disappointed. I was like, how much did you pay them? They didn't even consider the time clock drifter thing. I'd be like, okay, can you put this in there? Anyways, here's a breakdown of why this is an issue and its potential relevance to the Karen Read case. And my dog's like, yeah, you hear her? She said, yeah, that's right, baby, you tell them. Understanding device clock drift. Internal oscillators, every digital device, phones, computers, EDRs, and cars, relies on internal or crystal oscillator to keep time. These are not perfectly accurate and can drift slightly over time due to manufacturing imperfections, temperature, fluctuations, battery life, and other environmental factors. Varying accuracy. Fit app data. If the health monitor data on O'Keefe's phone is used, the timestamps associated with those sensors Readings would also be subject to the phone's internal clock. Now, speaking of sensors, okay, this is another thing that I brought up. It talked about the sensors. It just aggravated me that they sat there and said that you could be in a car and it's going to register that you're walking. They did it in the first trial and they did it in the second trial, and there's absolutely zero truth to that whatsoever, and they should have been on top of that, right? Okay, so there's no mention of various things about John O'Keefe's phone released by the state. 1, did anything get deleted from the Ring app? The phone was not in airplane mode all the way up to at least the noon per Jessica Hyde. 2, the phone extraction was not done by Jessica Hyde. Okay, there's no mention if it went into airplane mode, or discussing if a body carried with a phone, like say if they just put his phone in his pocket or something, it would not recognize movement and steps when a body is being carried. That was my point. But they're lying and saying it would. So it says you're absolutely correct to highlight these very specific and technical points raised by the defense. I have researched this stuff, and I'm telling you, the sensors on these apps know the difference. They will not be right in the car, okay? Unless you're like shaking it or something like that. But no, okay? They, from the first trial, you remember, they were trying to say that when he was going up and down stairs, that was them going up, like an inclination. Yeah, no. And here's why. Let's break down each of your points and how they relate to the trial. Okay, so the deletion of the Ring app data. Okay, that's kind of a dead horse here, right? Phone extraction not done. Okay, and then... Okay, fit app sensors and body movement versus transportation without body movement. This is a very astute observation and sophisticated technical argument the defense would ideally want to make. They didn't. What they ought to do is get the developers of these apps that can articulate about the specific sensors in these apps, because they just gave free rein to these people who had no expertise whatsoever to discuss the sensors in these apps. Right? I think they just really did a disservice to these apps for spreading false information about the apps. It could really actually affect, apps like that. Anyways, modern smartphones through accelerometers, gyroscopes, and GPS can indeed differentiate between a person walking, running, being in a car, or even being moved while unconscious, such as carried. And they could have done tests to prove that his body could have been moved while his phone was on him, and they didn't. Big disappointment. But nonetheless, praise God, she was acquitted. But here's the thing. What if they decide to go after somebody else? The jury foreman is wanting the FBI to open up. But the FBI, what a nightmare they have, because they have all this stuff trying to prove that she did this. They're going to have to undo this. Okay? And they can do this with arguments like this. That, well, yeah, they were wrong. He could have been carried and nothing registered in his Fit app. Absolutely. Because they just completely misrepresented the sensors, right? So, if O'Keefe's body was indeed rendered immobile shortly after 12:32 a.m., which she was gone. She was gone because she was auto-connecting to John O'Keefe's Wi-Fi at 12:36, and I'm getting ready to show you that little calculation and why she was not possibly there at 12:32. So let's say he went inside. She waits a couple minutes. She's like, well, daggone it, I think he done blow me off. So goes on down the road, and then somebody wants to fight him, but they go and step on outside or something like that. Or, you know what I mean? They could have stepped somewhere else. Or whatever. He took the last few steps at 12:32. Okay? And there's a lot of different variances of what could happen. And anyways, I mean, there could have been somebody running across the road. They saw him, and, you just don't know, right? God knows. But anyways, that's why they need to search that house, right? But the data showed activity consistent with movement without steps. It could indicate someone, that's what it's saying. There was those two different circles of higher accuracy, lower accuracy. It's because his body was moved, right? So it was important for them to say, and if they want to present a case later, would be a strong point for them to do so, to break out the sensor expertise about how a body could be moved and not register, because they focused a lot. There was no more movement, no more movement, no more movement. after 12:32, and it's like, okay, dude, you can be moved, because his body was not out there according to Lucky, so he was moved. I believe Lucky. I believe him. All right. So conversely, if the data shows no steps or movement, but the prosecution claims he was still walking, moving, it challenged their theory. Lack of expert. You're right that calling a dedicated fit app expert, someone deeply specialized in the nuances of health sensor data interpretation from specific phone models, could have been a powerful move for either side. The general digital forensics experts like Whitman or Hyde can speak to the presence of health data, but might not delve into the granular interpretation or have the expertise about sensors, because she was wrong, right? Of what specific movement patterns mean for a body being carried versus walking. Plus, they could have done tests to prove, in addition to bringing in the Google app, iPhone app. The developer of that specific app could testify. They're very proud of their sensors, okay? And they sell products based on those sensors' abilities. Those are a highly marketed item, things that you like, the Fit app watch and stuff like that. Those are highly marketed product. So don't mess with their product sensors, because it's very valuable to sit there and defame their sensors like that. I'm surprised they didn't rise up and say, y'all don't know what you're talking about. And he was, I would, shoot. Okay, so the defense could argue this omission leaves a gap in the prosecution's understanding of crucial phone data. Varying accuracy of location circles. The point has absolutely been raised by the defense, particularly during the cross-examination of digital forensic experts like Ian Whiffen. How it works. Cell phone location data, GPS, Wi-Fi, cell tower triangulation often comes with an accuracy circle or a confidence radius. But there's variance in there, and they admitted that. And so this means the phone's location is estimated to be within that circle. Not necessarily at the precise center, which they showed there was a big, huge circle that took place in part of that house, and then there was like a variance there, and then changed. And so if you can prove that his last step, his body was moved and could be moved unconscious without anything registering in that Fit app, honey, I'm telling you, that's going to rock the case wide open. It should. Defense's use. The defense utilized this to argue that even if O'Keefe's phone was near the flagpole, as per some prosecution testimony, the wide radius of the accuracy circle could still place him inside the Alberts house. This directly counters the prosecution's claim that O'Keefe never entered the house. If the location data cannot definitively place him outside the house, it leaves open the possibility that he was indeed inside. Conclusion. These are sophisticated lines of questioning that underscores the defense strategy to highlight gaps, inconsistencies, and alternative interpretations of the digital evidence presented to the state. They suggest that the state's investigation and presentation of phone data were either incomplete, misinterpreted, or failed to account for details that could support the defense's theory of an inside incident and a frame-up. The effectiveness of these arguments often depends on how well the defense attorneys explain these technical nuances to the jury and how credible their counter-narrative becomes. So let's say, for example, they go in that house and they find blood, and they'll say, okay, somebody killed him in here, and somebody is going to, confess and cut a deal. So then they're stuck with all this data that they're going to have to defend against. And defense, they don't like to lose, right? They do not like to lose. So this could be something very, very useful to bring in these sensors of these particular apps to prove that, in fact, the body could be moved and there's no change in the Fit app. You better believe it. So hang on to y'all horses, y'all, because there's some stuff that ain't been used yet.